My name is Kathy Galvin, and I'm director of the Africa Center. And today we have Professor Peter Gorder here to talk about some of his work in Africa. And I just want to introduce him and say a few things about him. I think I'm talking to everybody online at this point. Peter is serving a second stint as chair of the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. He spent 5 years in industry working as a contractor for NASA Ames Research Center. And then he went to Kansas State University after that, and where he established the Aircraft Design and Manufacturing Research Center. And he did some work for NASA there as well. His focus has transitioned to the workforce development role of Engineering Academy. He has developed a unique capstone experience program, and this includes all engineering majors at UCCS, providing an opportunity for true multidisciplinary team experiences. And we're going to hear about that today. But for those of you online, I just want to do some housekeeping. And that is, we have our Africa Center coffee social on Wednesday at 10:30. Next Monday, we have Gregory Akal, who will be virtually talking to us about his work in Turkana, Northern Kenya. And next Friday is our Africa and Ale event. You're all invited. And that is our sort of end of year festival. We have African food, we have African music, we have 4 breweries who have donated African ales for us. So that starts at 3:30 on Friday at the Alakar Museum over off of campus. So a lot happening in the next week or so. But right now, I just want to hand it over to Dr. Gorder. He's integrating cultural awareness into the engineering design process. So thank you
very much. Yeah, so I was asked to speak about this probably about 5 years ago now, from a global, GLINT is the acronym of the organization down at UCCS. That is not specifically Africa, but it's a global cultural awareness kind of organization. And they heard something about me doing things in Africa and asked if I'd talk about, to them, that seemed really strange, that engineers would be doing something in Africa. And so I thought, well, I've tried this title of integrating cultural awareness into the engineering design process. But as I started thinking about it more, it seemed to me like I get that that's not what typical people think about with engineers, but really that is everything about what an engineer does. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm assuming my audience here are not engineers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what engineering is, going to talk about our senior design program, some of our sponsor organizations, and then projects. And I'm going to invite Malin, who's here. She was on our most recent trip to Africa in January, so she can talk about one of this year's projects, one of the projects we have going this year. So, what is an engineer? When you want to find an answer, you see what other people say. And so if Student Scholarships is an organization, as the name sounds like it for kids who are thinking about going to college and are not sure what they want to study, it gives a little synopsis of what the different degree types are. And so what they say is that engineers apply principles of science and mathematics to develop economical solutions to technical problems, okay, mostly. Their work is a link between scientific discoveries and the commercial applications that meet social and consumer needs. And I guess what I want to do is I want to emphasize that societal piece, because that's really what engineers do. We solve problems for people. And in order to solve problems for people, we have to understand the people that are going to be impacted by whatever decisions we're going to make. And a lot of times in our engineering endeavors, we can lose sight of that because we're focused so much on the technical challenges that we lose sight of that. Why do we care? we shouldn't care just because it's cool or just because it's an exciting problem. We should care because it's going to have an impact on people. And so that's really the aspect of it that I think these projects help with. One of my favorite quotes, Theodore von Karman, so he was an aerospace engineer in the 50s and 60s, famous guy. And I've seen this quote, a whole bunch of different variations of it. And I don't know whether he said it a bunch of times in a bunch of different ways, or whether people have just sort of morphed it. But his comment was that scientists discover the world that is, and engineers create the world that is yet to be. And that's the other aspect of it, but that sort of loses the why too, right? We don't create the world that is yet to be just because. Theoretically, we're doing something that's going to provide some societal benefit. Not that anybody cares, but it actually is derived from two Latin words. And what we are as engineers really are structured problem solvers. So I'm going to talk a little bit that for any engineers watching, this is going to be obvious that you know this, but this is what we call the engineering design process. And so the idea is that first we have to identify that there is a problem, but it's not enough to just have a high level understanding of a problem that needs to be solved. We really need to develop a very clear definition of what it's going to mean to satisfy all aspects of solving this problem. And so we call that an engineering specification. It's part of the problem specification phase. And it is really the part that the cultural awareness has to work its way into, because that's what's going to determine, that cultural awareness is going to drive some of the decisions that we're going to make about what is going to comprise a successful solution to the problem. Once we have that, we can start coming up with different ways that we think we can meet that objective, meet all of those specifications. And then we're going to refine, we're going to analyze, we're going to test, we're going to have the best one to meet it, and then we're ultimately going to come up with a solution. But again, if we don't do a good job with that problem specification, if we don't incorporate all of the aspects that are going to be necessary for the solution to be useful and a true solution to the problem, at that problem specification phase, everything else we do is going to lead us to something that isn't really going to solve the problem. Okay, so that's where I lead into the capstone design experience that all of our engineering students at UCCS go through. So all of the different majors, and we don't have anywhere near as many majors on our campus as you guys do on your campus. But the students in every single one of them, we pooled together formally now. We had some informal multidisciplinary teaming opportunities before, but we've now made that a formal integration so that all of our engineers are working together. And the reality is that in industry, that's the way engineering teams are built. They're not discipline specific. And the reality is that real problems don't fit into nice discipline specific boxes anymore. We have external project sponsors, as you do here. Most of them are companies, but not all. We have projects. Yeah, we've grown tremendously over the last 25 years that I've been there. From first year that I was there, and the very first year of mechanical engineering on the UCCS campus, we had 5 students in our capstone design program. And so I had single team, company sponsored project, 1 team. And now we're looking, we have typically, this year we have 27 teams from all of those different majors working on their capstone design projects. And we really emphasize that problem specification phase. When we have an external sponsor that brings a problem to us, I don't want that sponsor to provide us with what we call an engineering specification. In engineering terms, that is the document that says, if you produce something that meets these measurable values on these and only these measurable quantities, you've done your job. And so once you have a specification, you can dive in and produce something that will do that. But the process of getting to that specification is a critical one. And because if we ignore some facets of the solution that are going to be impactful in whether that solution is really a solution or not, we're spinning our wheels and we're not going to get to where we're going to go. So we do spend a lot of time on that. And the problem specification portion of the project is particularly important for these service projects that we do. As I say, most of the projects come from companies. It's a great opportunity for companies. They get a nice little test drive of potential employees. They get a different view of the students in this kind of an arrangement where they have presented a problem and the students are independently working to solve that problem than they do with internships, which is another way that companies get a test drive of potential employees. But internships typically are more structured. The students are brought in and told what to do. And yes, you get a feel for whether they fit culturally in with the group and whether they, hi, welcome, come on in. No, you're good. You're good. And whether they'll fit in and whether they are capable of solving the kinds of problems that the company would like to solve. But in these kinds of relationships, they also get the opportunity to see how the students can self-direct, can figure out how to identify the milestones, derive a plan to achieve those milestones, work independently, overcome obstacles. And so it's a lot different. It's a lot different of a look at what those students are capable of doing. And of course, they also get a group of students to take a crack at solving a real problem that they have. The company-sponsored projects are universally projects that are problems that the company absolutely has, but they don't have their back burner. They're on the list somewhere of when we have time, when we have resources, we'll tackle this, but we don't have the time right now. So it's great to have a group of students take a look at it and get them at least a head start on. And it's a great opportunity for students. The nice thing about these kinds of relationships and these kinds of projects is that the students, unlike other classes, the students have a different motivation. When they're working on a project for an external company, a potential employer, even if it's not a potential employer, it's just somebody outside. It's not trying to solve or do a homework assignment for a faculty member. And let's face it, students, you guys make decisions about, I've got finite resources, time. I'm going to give on this one. I'm not going to really put that much effort in because it's not going to hurt me that much, and I'll put my effort in over here. Well, it's totally different when you're trying to satisfy an external client of some sort. And the objective is not necessarily to get a good grade in the class, but to do a good job and to satisfy the needs of the client. And so it provides a totally different motivator for those students. And we really absolutely see that very clearly. Okay, so that's what the overall program is. Yeah, so we've had lots of diversification over time. Part of it is we have companies, we have for-profit companies, not-for-profit companies, and then we have service entities. About 10 years ago is when we started having these service projects as an option. And initially it was student-driven. The students who wanted to do some sort of a service project would say, hey, they'd do their own research, they'd come in and they'd say, hey, I think that this would be a fun project to address. And sometimes it was local. It wasn't even necessarily always international. Most of the time, the students were looking for an international opportunity of some sort. And we've done projects in India, in the Philippines, in other places in Africa before we finally started to formalize it. Because one of the hard things is you have to have the ability to interact with the customer. the people that you're trying to do something for. And so from Colorado Springs to have that kind of access to the people, if you find some source that says this would be a great problem to solve, A, is it really? I don't know. Somebody thought it was. But then B, how are we going to communicate with the people to really understand all of the facets of what's going to be important in solving this problem? One of the early projects that a student came with was a project that was going to be based in Western Africa. The problem that had been identified was that some of the village buildings had been converted to cinder block construction with tin roof, and that's just an oven. The old historic way of building buildings were more like adobe, mud walls and thatch roofs, and those are great. They are nice and insulated, and they let the hot air escape through the roof, so they don't cook like these cinder block houses. And so the students thought, well, the best thing to do would be to make these mud walls and thatch roofs. But as it turns out, the local folks were absolutely not interested at all in doing that, because to them, that was going backwards. And so, but how do you even know to think that? My philosophy on any kind of a service activity is you've got sort of three ways to do it. You can do it to the people you're trying to help, which is the way that it happens a lot of times. You know, we know best. We have the resources. We're going to come in and we're going to solve your problems for you. And that is not effective. It's not sustainable. Most of the time, it's not even helpful. You can do it for, that's better. Doing something for people, at least you've identified something that they also see would be a benefit if this problem was solved. But if you don't really understand all the facets of what's going to impact their acceptance of whatever kind of solution you're going to put in, and what's going to make it sustainable, and what's going to make it have legs to go beyond your interaction with them, limited impact. So what we try to do is we try to take the do things with approach, because that's really the way to have sustainable impact when you're providing help. But that means we need to have a connection. And so we've had different opportunities to help create that connection in the past, but it's really important to have somebody to connect with. And that's what brought us to the identification of partners that we can work with that do have boots on the ground, that have an actual connection to the people that we're going to try to solve problems for. The first group that we worked with was Lutheran World Relief, and they've got entities all over the globe. And so when we were doing future projects after those first ones, when we were doing projects in India or in Africa or in the Philippines, it was always because there was a local Lutheran World Relief group there that had, with working with the people, had identified that, boy, it would be great if we had a solution to this problem. And that's great. That's an absolutely critical piece to it. And then I got connected to the Global Livingston Institute. We're going to talk a little bit about who they are, but I know you guys know who they are. And they have been an invaluable partner for quite a long time now. And after that, I got connected with Imagine Her. Both Global Livingston Institute and Imagine Her are based, well, Global Livingston Institute has a broader reach. Imagine Her, specifically Uganda. Global Livingston Institute includes Uganda. So, yeah, so Global Livingston Institute was established, 16 years ago now. Jamie Van Leeuwen was affiliated with the CU Denver campus. I don't know what exactly his title was, but he established it, and they still do have a presence there. Jamie is no longer the CEO. Sarah McCarthy is now the CEO there, but we have established that connection And it's been a great connection all through. And what really drew me to them was this whole listen, think, act mantra that describes their approach to what they would say is community building, but what I would say is problem solving. And the idea is that first you have to listen. This is the whole problem specification phase of the design process. This is where you have to listen to the people that you're going to try to solve a problem for to really understand what it was before you then think about how you're going to solve it, before you then ultimately execute. And that's the way we approach our engineering design process all the time. That dovetailed very nicely with their whole philosophy. And so that's how we got connected. Then I got connected with Imagine Her after I had been going to Uganda for quite a while. They are a much smaller NGO. They do have some US support, but a much smaller organization. It is based in Kampala in Uganda. Started out super small. They were just providing sanitary products for women in Uganda, but they've expanded now. Their scope is much broader and focused on providing women with the means of financial independence, which is the stat that I had, and I don't know what it is now. I really should update my stat, but upwards of 95% of women in Uganda, as recent as 7 years ago, when I got attached with them, were financially dependent on somebody. Family, husband, government, somebody, not financially independent. And so that's their focus has been on trying to remedy that. And their approach to that is to try to find ways that women can do something to earn money, whether it's a service or a product or whatever, some sort of an entrepreneurial effort to make money. So as I say, we have been focusing in Uganda for the last 6 years, six or 7 years. This is not the best map. It's a little better. So Lake Bunyoni is where GLI has sort of a base of operations in Uganda. They've got office stuff in Kampala, but they've got a retreat resort on Lake Bunyoni, which is just outside of Kabale town. So way down here in the southwest corner of Uganda. And so that's where our projects had predominantly been centered. Okay. Yeah, so this is just sort of a list of some of the projects that we've undertaken over the years. The improving boat safety is the one that Mollen's going to talk about as we roll into that a little bit more. Okay, so I said we got to be able to talk to people. We've got to, in order to understand really what's going to be important in any solution that we come up with, what's going to make for an impactful, sustainable solution to whatever the problem is that they're being faced. We have to communicate with them. And so our sponsors provide a mechanism for that. This is a 2-semester project. And so the first semester, the students are in Colorado trying to learn everything that they can. They do have access to people on the ground in Uganda, but it is Zoom connections with not necessarily the specific impacted people, but the people, at least from our organizations that we're working with. So it's better than nothing. But one of the things that the students discover, and I tell them before we go, and I think that they have a real good feel for everything they're going to need to know, because they've been on Zoom calls with people in Uganda, they've asked questions, they've gotten answers. But one of the things that they've realized is that it's like a miniature game of telephone, where you whisper to the person next to you and it goes around the table, and by the time it comes back, it's totally changed. Well, that happens just between two people when you come from such different cultures. Because when we ask questions, we have a clear understanding of why we're asking that question and what kind of information we're trying to elicit. But that's based on our filter and our understanding of the world and our previous experiences and everything else. The people on the other side are hearing it through their own prism, their own experiences. They don't hear it the way that we intend it. They hear it as it makes sense to them in their context, and they provide an answer that makes perfect sense as a response to that question based on their understanding of it. And then we hear it different again because they intended it one way, but that was because they were communicating based through their lens, through their experiences, and we're hearing it through ours, which changes everything. And so the students, generally speaking, always feel like they have a real good grasp. They've got all their questions answered, they understand everything, and then they get there and they discover they don't. But that's why that trip is so incredibly important, because that is really where the learning and the understanding of really how an impactful solution is going to be able to be made happens. So we do that over winter break because getting to Africa takes a long time. And so that's really the first chance we have of an extended period of time when we have enough time to make that trip. So again, these projects are intended to provide the students with a different opportunity to do their senior design project. We want to make sure that the students who are inclined, who want to do this kind of a project, not every student does. A lot of the students are very interested in working for Northrop because they're hoping to get hired by Northrop. Totally get it. But there are certainly some students for whom this kind of project speaks to them and they want to be involved in that. And so we want to make sure that we give students a chance to do that. And for those students, again, the reason we have to make the trip is so that the students can understand really what it's going to take to provide a meaningful solution to this, to the people that we're trying to help. It's not cheap. It's very expensive. And we have done a really good job and very intentionally tried to offset the costs so that the students aren't footing the whole bill. In fact, they put a pretty small fraction of the whole bill. I don't want them, I want them to have some skin in the game, but I don't want it to be have a financial barrier be the reason that a student couldn't participate in something like this. So we have to date typically received some funding from the dean's office. Our sponsored programs, the companies that pay for their projects, they pay a fee into a fund, and we have funds for that. And then some of the personal funds our costs are covered by the students. And then when we're in country, GLI has provided all of our support. We are met at the airport, we have a driver, we have a guide. We're never on our own, which was an important facet for me to be bringing a bunch of students. So I pointed out that we work way down here at Lake Banyoni, way down in the bottom, but we fly into Entebbe, which is where the airport is, and our first stop is Kampala. Now, Kampala is a very different environment than where we're going to go and where we're going to, and the people that we're going to be working with to try to solve a problem for. But it's very urban, it's very congested, it's very busy, and it's very unlike the experience that just about any of our students have ever had before. But it's part of the picture of Uganda. And so for me, that's an important piece of the puzzle. When we get down to, you're going to see some pictures of Lake Banyoni. It is paradise. I mean, it is a beautiful, very picturesque area. Not at all like what we see in Kampala, but it's part of Uganda. And so I don't want them to think that Lake Banyoni is Uganda. And I want them to see more of Uganda than just that. And so we walk around. Most of these pictures that I'm putting up here are one of the first trips that we had, just because I had all these pictures arranged. Malin's going to show you some pictures of their trip as well. But it's, again, it's a eye-opening experience for our students. Most of them have never experienced anything like what we experience when we're in Uganda, but it is part of the story that they're going to ingest to help them understand better what it's going to mean to provide meaningful support. Whoops, I skipped. One of the fun things is we cross the equator. All right, so you guys are the Africa Center. I swear, if I ask now, you guys already know, but how much of Africa is below the equator versus above the equator? I would have bet money that most of it is below the equator. I know, a very small amount of it is below the equator. It just, when I see the map up on the wall, and just in my head, I think, okay, because that's south, right? But that's the Mercator projection that screws everything up. But anyway, we get to cross the equator, which is kind of a fun thing. Students get to straddle the equator on the way down to Lake Bunyoni, which, as I say, once we get there, it is just absolutely gorgeous. The people that live on Lake Bunyoni live the way that they've lived for hundreds of years. Literally. They don't have power. They use the lake for transportation. Mullen's going to talk a little bit about the issues around that. It is a high elevation lake, so it is clean water. But many of the projects that we have had with them have been around water anyway, because you can't really get a good feel for how steep these hillsides are. But it's a very deep lake because of the way that it was formed, and the hillsides are really, really steep. And again, they don't have power, which means if they need to get water from the lake, that means hiking down to the lake, filling up a jug, putting it on your head, and hiking back up the hill. And so while there's plenty of water, there's not a shortage of water, it's just not very conveniently located to where they want to use it.
What's the name of the people?
I don't even know. That is, yeah. So, and I know that they have mentioned their tribal name, but I didn't internalize that.
And they're agriculturalists.
They are. Yep. They are basically subsistence farmers for the most part, but they do sell some of their crops, some of their yield to get things for clothes and stuff like that. And they transport it all on the lake. So Ntusi is the resort that GLI supports. We stay there when we're there. Normally, we didn't this year because it's being renovated. But normally we stay at Ntusi. And one of the things that they do, this is GLI, is they have a model farm where they try to teach the local villagers different ways to improve their farming, improve their yield, vary their crops, things like that. So they've got a model farm, and that's one of the things that we investigate, and we're going to have an opportunity to see a little bit more about that one as well. And of course, one of the things that any project that the students undertake is going to rely on is local resources. We're not going to build something here, bring it over there, and hand it to them. That's not going to be sustainable. It's got to, if it's going to be something that is going to be impactful to them, it's got to be something that can be replicated there by them. And so that means taking advantage of local resources, which looks very different than us going to Home Depot. There are, I don't know, probably 15 hardware stores in Kabale Town, which is where they would go. There's a small store up at the lake that you can get some things at. There's no Home Depot. This is a lumber yard. They've got rough cut lumber. You can get wood. They do make their own bricks. And you can get other resources, but it's something that the students have to really understand if they're going to try to come up with a solution that's going to be usable. But it's not all work. It was kind of all work for Mullen. You had a little bit of playtime, a little, not very much. We like to have a little bit more playtime because that's part of the experience too. And so the team that year got into a pickup soccer game with a bunch of the kids that were out of school, because we were there between sessions of school. So they had a fun time with that pickup soccer game. One of the first projects that we did dealt with food storage. So they live in very small houses. They don't have the ability to harvest and then preserve that harvest to sell when the market is better, for instance. They have to sell it now. They harvest it and they bring it to market and they sell it. Of course, everybody's harvesting now. And so the price of potatoes is going down because everybody's bringing their potatoes to the market. And so one of the things that was proposed is if there was a means of storing their food safely so that it would be, they could choose when they're going to bring it to market, then they'd have a little bit more control over the sale price and everything else. What the students came up with essentially is a traditional root cellar with a modification of having a natural convection cooling. That's what the smokestacks on the top are. What you can't see is there's also pipes that come out of the ground on the bottom so that you can build this into the hillside. The natural convection will draw air in through the pipe on the ground, through a nice cool ground, and so cool off that air and to replace the hot air that's going up through the chimney. So, but again, that came out of having students actually able to go there, see what they can do, what they can't do, what will work for them locally. Again, they do make their own bricks. So that was not the decision was to construct using their own bricks. And then the water projects, as I mentioned, we've done several of them. One of the teams went to Uganda with the idea of installing a Wirtz pump. So a Wirtz pump is a unique design of a pump. It's just a coil of hose. And so it sounds simpler than it is, but it is absolutely something that they can build. So when they got there, they spent time in the town identifying the different stuff that they could buy, the different components that they could buy locally, that they could source locally. And we also employed a couple of craftspeople. So this is Donald, he's a plumber. And so he was helping. And then there was also a carpenter. I don't know where he is in that picture. He's probably right here. So local craftspeople to help with the construction of this Wirtz pump. And now let's see if I can make it work. Oh, there's no sound. Well, they're about to cheer because it's actually working. And so there's a water tank that's way up on the hill. And just by turning the crank on that pump, they can fill the water tank and then have that water tank available to water the plants in the greenhouse. And they've got the water source way up the hill. And so this was something that was a great example of doing it with. Again, they were already talking about design improvements that they were going to make. So it was a very fun connection there.
There's some seriously happy people.
Oh, yes. Yes. They were very, very. Oh, so here's the thing. So across the lake is where the Ntusi Resort is. I was sitting outside of the Ntusi Resort across the lake, and I heard the eruption of cheers. And what their work all that day was getting all kinds of attention. So around on different peninsulas, people were sort of gathering and wondering what the heck's going on. And when they started cheering, the other people who I cannot imagine that they really knew what was happening, but they started cheering too. And so it was echoing around the lake. All right. And with that, I am going to now invite Mullen up to talk about this year's trip.
Perfect.
Okay, as Dr. Gorder said, my name's Malin. I was on this year's GLI project. So our project focused on the water safety aspect of it. As he said, around Lake Bunyoni, the people use boats to get around. You saw in that last little video, it's just kind of like a big lake, where there's like a bunch of small little villages and homes all around the lake. And that's how they get around. If they want to go to the doctors, they need to get on the lake and go on a boat. If they want to get to market, they need to get on a boat and go in the lake. And a big mode of transportation along this lake are these dugout canoes. I have a better picture on the next slide that you can kind of see them, but it's literally a dugout of a tree trunk. So you're dealing with this round hull. And if you know anything about boats, you know that that is very unstable. If you don't know anything about boats, I'm sure you can imagine there's nothing that's really keeping it in one position. It can kind of roll along on the water. And so it's a very real issue with these unstable boats. When they are going to market, they will load these up with all of the produce, all of the goods that they have. And they will put people in these canoes too. And then all of a sudden, your center of gravity is too high and they're very susceptible to tipping over, especially if there's a storm. So the problem statement we were kind of given was just laying that out and then saying, okay, is there anything we can do to make them more stable? And as Dr. Gorder mentioned, when we first got there, so beforehand, like talking about it, we were like, okay, yeah, this could be an idea, like maybe we'll have these resources. And I think we had this element of, okay, but what are we actually walking into? But the second we got to the canoes, we realized that our first solution was actually a horrible solution and we had to go right back to the drawing board. And we never would have known that unless we had the opportunity to go there and actually play with the canoes, actually see what materials we had to deal with, actually go into the stores and look at all of the things that we were working with. And even like something as simple as, I think this picture is a great example of like, yeah, it's a knife and matches and plastic and all of that. But if we were going to try to look for materials in the United States, we would have probably a pocket knife and like a better sheet of plastic. It's just different. It's a parallel, yes, but different than what we would have imagined, which makes it really hard to conceptualize exactly what you're going to come up with when they're not the materials that you have distinctly in your head. So yeah, essentially, we also used the carpenter. Our final design is we came up with these little brackets to make sure that we aren't hindering the use of the canoe. And I think I have a better picture on, oh, I guess not. But we essentially used water jugs, jerry cans more so, those are in a different slide. These yellow cans, we put them on the side of the canoe. We used a rubber rope that is like if you took a tire and a rope and you put them together, is essentially what it's like. Again, hard to translate that because unless I can show you what I'm talking about, you probably don't know. And we used that to wrap around these brackets to create tension along the canoe. Used some plastic twine to then tie through these brackets around our cans, around to the other side and secure them under, kind of creating like flotation on both sides. And it ended up being, with the math that we did, 73.33% more effective and more stable. Check in the box, right? Great, came up with a solution. Except it's actually, there's a lot more to it than that. Because as much as yes, we did come up with a solution, that's really not the point of the project. If we got there and we're like, great, here's this fancy contraption that can stabilize your canoe, we didn't really solve the problem because there's more than one canoe out on this lake. There are many canoes out on this lake. So we needed a solution that was going to be able to be affordable to the people that were using it, using materials that they actually were able to access, and then also in a manner that they were able to replicate themselves. So a really big part of our project and something that we really emphasized on was trying to come up with a solution early enough that we had time to then teach it to the locals. So we came up with the solution working with some of the GLI staff, which was amazing to have them there, kind of guiding us through and like showing them, well, this is something that we're familiar with, so let's do it this way, which was amazing. But at the same time, at the end of the project, we were able to then, you can see in this picture over here, That's me teaching some of the locals, some of the people that were working on the project, some of the people that weren't working on the project, the canoe owner himself, because we had a local that was willing to let us work with his canoe, which was amazing. We're very grateful for that. But we were able to actually teach them the whole process of how we came up with this design, which was a really, really important part of it, because we wouldn't have actually come up with a viable solution if it wasn't teachable. And also, it's like I said, like there's so many different canoes. Like if you only put a safety device on a single canoe, you're not actually doing anything for the safety of the other canoes. So the impact on the lake is, it's pretty obvious to see that you're creating a safer environment, less lives are lost. We did make sure that at the beginning of this project, we went into town and we talked to the people and we asked them, like, is this actually an issue? And it was a resounding yes. Every single person we had talked to said that they knew someone who had drowned because as a result of these canoes. So creating something that is 73.3% more stable is huge as far as that goes. And it was nice, as Dr. Gorder said with the pump, the locals were very interested in what we were doing, because, you know, we come in where we clearly stick out and all of a sudden we're tying plastic water bottles onto canoes. It looks really, really silly. So while we were there, there were a bunch of workers working at N2C. We were working at N2C, and they were always like kind of looking and like seeing. And then by the time we were done with it, we had them come down and try out the canoe and be like, okay, like, what do you think? Do you like it? Is it more stable? And it was a resounding yes. We had people that were too scared to get in these dugout canoes willing to try our canoe because other people were saying that it was stable enough. Like they put on their life jacket and they were really brave about it. And they got in and they were like, wait, I can do this. And it was pretty amazing to see. But moreover, there's also a lot of student impact, I would say. Because yes, we went there, we had a successful project, great. But I think the bigger picture, you get a lot more out of this than just an engineering project. We were able to kind of like cross that cultural boundary and kind of get back to what the heart of engineering is, because this project makes it so clear to see that what we're doing is a direct result of bettering people's lives. And it can be hard to see that when you're working on a single part in a bigger product. But say that bigger product is like a safer car seat for kids, and you're just working on a little lever mechanism, you don't feel very important. But at the same time, what you're doing in that engineering is actually for people and making something safer for people and bettering people's lives. So to kind of get back to the heart of that in such an immediate way with this project, kind of brings back the focus of engineering. You're not just there to solve problems on paper, write out equations, find the buoyancy force or whatever. You're there to actually solve a problem to help make people's lives better, which I think is super amazing. And it also allows people the opportunity to kind of get out of their comfort zone and see what the world is like. Because in our like single focus bubble of the United States, we can see our problems. We can see that, oh, maybe we want, you know, to build this other rocket, or maybe we want to build this new infrastructure, and that can be great and that can better humanity. But to get a better world picture of issues we have around the world and other ways that we can be thinking and other technologies we can be bringing in a way that is incorporated with the way that they are living, rather than detracting from it. As Dr. Gorder said, doing engineering with them rather than to them, I think is huge. And the first step to that is being able to understand their cultures. And you're not going to do that if you don't leave your bubble. If you're able to actually go through the country and talk to the people and understand what they're thinking and what they want and what the result they're hoping for is, you're able to better incorporate that with your design. So we had the pleasure of leading a swim class while we were there, which was super fun, which goes right hand in hand with water safety. But it was just super awesome to get to like interact with the people, and even the kids saw our design and thought it was probably kind of funny looking, but they all kind of liked it too because it was just different. But yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot to be said for the impact on your education and on your view as an engineer, as a student, in a project like this, if you're willing to take that step and leave your comfort zone and understand more of the worldview. Yeah,
Awesome.